Normally, I would include films in my monthly reading wrap-up video. However, this month I ended up watching so many films, I decided to separate it out into its own video, which is, this one. I watched 10 films this month, of which 8 were new to me. The most represented genre this month is horror, because I've been falling further down that rabbit hole, but we do also have some sci-fi, we have some animation, and some kind of quiet, slow art house drama, so, a little bit of everything, but yeah, it is mostly horror, so brace yourself. My first film of the month is barely a film, really, so I'll get this out of the way fairly quickly. It's Twin Peaks: The Missing Pieces. This was released in 2014, but it was actually shot in the early 90s. It was directed by David Lynch and co-written by Lynch with Robert Engels. And as the title might suggest, it is a compilation of missing pieces, outtakes and deleted scenes from Twin Peaks: Fire Walk With Me. So if you haven't seen the first 2 seasons of Twin Peaks and Fire Walk With Me, there's no reason for you to watch this film. And even if you have seen those, just go into this with the knowledge that it's not a film that stands on its own. It is basically filling in some missing pieces from Fire Walk With Me. And I don't know how essential those pieces were to fill in. It is nice to see some of the familiar faces from the first 2 seasons of Twin Peaks who didn't make it into Fire Walk With Me. He did shoot some of these scenes and then cut them out of the film. So it's nice to see them in this kind of compilation. But I can see why most of this stuff was cut out. It's not really essential to Fire Walk With Me or really Twin Peaks as a whole. So I would say that this is really only for very dedicated fans. I enjoyed it because I am now a dedicated fan of Twin Peaks, but yeah, otherwise you don't need to see this. Next up, I continued my exploration of horror movies with The Witch, or The Vivitch. I know, I've made that joke before. This is a film written and directed by Robert Eggers. It was his debut film, and it was released in 2015. And this is a sort of gothic folk horror. It's set in the 1630s, and it follows a Puritan family who are kind of ejected or expelled from the village where they live over religious dispute and have to set up on their own. The family is beset by a series of disasters. Their youngest son, their baby son, goes missing in mysterious circumstances. Their crops start failing, and basically they start starving. And while all this is happening, the family kind of turns on each other and starts accusing each other of witchcraft. And the question is there really witchcraft going on, or are they just starving and going a bit mad? I was quite excited to see this film. I had previously seen The Lighthouse, Robert Eggers' second film, and I really enjoyed that. It's very strange and atmospheric. It really kind of gripped me, slightly weirded me out in a way that I enjoyed. So I was hoping I would enjoy this one as well, especially because it is classified as folk horror, and one of my all-time favourite horror films is The Wicker Man, and, that is a classic of folk horror. So, yeah, I was hoping that this, being a more recent folk horror, might tick my boxes. Unfortunately, it really didn't. Now, part of that is, I think, down to just stylistic choices. I just didn't enjoy the look or the sound of this film at all. In fact, the audio I thought was just atrocious. The dialogue is so quiet and so muffled and mumbled that I was faced with a choice of either cranking up the volume until the loud bits would become painful and probably disturb my neighbours, or put on the subtitles so I could understand what was being said. I opted for the subtitles grudgingly because I get kind of distracted by subtitles when it's in a language I already speak. I should be able to hear and understand what's being said, I feel. And yet I couldn't. So that really just pissed me off, honestly. And then having the subtitles on the bottom meant that even if I did hear perfectly what a line was, my eye would still be drawn to the text along the bottom. So that was just very distracting and frustrating. It also has a very kind of grey and drab and washed out look, which I understand is part of the atmosphere of it. But yeah, it just didn't appeal to me visually at all. And then, because of the kind of ambiguity of the story, well, I've made a video like a few months ago about appreciating ambiguous storytelling and enjoying when there's sort of space to interpret. But The Witch felt very much like there was one of two choices that you were kind of being locked into. You can either view it literally, like what you're seeing is the reality, so the witches that you're seeing are real, or you can imagine that these witches and supernatural elements are part of the family's shared delusion, and it's a more sort of realistic tragedy. And I think just it's almost not ambiguous enough. There's just two options, and because one is kind of presented as the literal thing on screen, and then you're kind of invited to think, but what if it's this? That's kind of, I think that's too narrow a choice for me. When it comes to ambiguous storytelling, I much prefer something that is more open to interpretation, that you can read in more than just two ways. So yeah, I didn't vibe with this film at all. I'll still give Robert Eggers another try because I did enjoy The Lighthouse. So, maybe I'll have a go with Nosferatu or The Northman. But yeah, unfortunately, The Witch was quite a dud for me. Now, for a complete change of pace, we have Robot Dreams. This was written and directed by Pablo Berger and released in 2023, and it's based on a graphic novel by Sarah Varon. It's a sort of animated, silent comedy drama, and it follows a lonely dog who decides to buy himself a friend, a robot. The two of them have a great time going about New York City, just having fun together. However, a trip to the beach turns to disaster when the robot develops a malfunction and can't leave. And then the beach is closed for the summer and the dog can't get to him. So the two are separated, and it's all about dog's attempts to rescue Robot, and Robot's dreams about being rescued, and what happens as time goes on. So, it's a really charming, really beautifully animated, really lovely film that, it starts out just purely charming and fun and whimsical, and then kind of becomes quite melancholy and bittersweet in a really beautiful way. I thought this was absolutely fantastic. It also made me kind of tear up, not for the film itself, but the thought that I couldn't shake that this is exactly the sort of film that I would have recommended to my mum if she were around to see it. I think she would have loved it. Also, just as a big fan of the art of animation and also of silent film, I just love that people are still making animated silent films now. I think that's great, and this is a really, really wonderful example of the art. Yeah, I can't recommend this one highly enough. If it sounds at all interesting to you, then I would urge you to check out Robot Dreams. And from one highlight of the year to another, it's Parasite. This is a 2019 South Korean film directed by Bong Joon-ho and co-written by Bong Joon-ho and Han Jin-won. It's a black comedy thriller. It's very dark and quite intense in a really gripping and wonderful way. It follows a family who are living in abject poverty, but they find a way to infiltrate the lives of this very wealthy family, one member at a time. They gradually kind of inveigle their way in. I won't tell you any more about it than that in case you haven't already seen it, but I mean, this was a very hyped film a few years ago, so, you may well have done already, but I'm just coming to it now, and yeah, I'm really glad I did. Anyway, yeah, this is a really incredible film, just brilliantly made, directed, written, acted, just everything about it is phenomenal. And the social commentary is so on point. It's really incredible. Yeah, as I said, this was an absolute highlight of the year, and I don't want to say too much more about it going in, just to not influence how you view it if you haven't already seen it. But yeah, if you haven't already seen it, go see Parasite. Next up, we have The Company of Wolves. This was directed by Neil Jordan, released in 1984, and it was co-written by Jordan with Angela Carter, based on Angela Carter's own stories. This is a gothic fantasy horror and a sort of dark retelling of various fairy tales, but most notably Little Red Riding Hood. The film is structured as a series of nested narratives. The whole thing is presented as a dream that a young teenage girl is having in bed, and we see kind of fairy tale versions of herself and her family members as she dreams them into this fairy tale. And then within that, there are also moments when characters will tell fairy tales or fables, or parables, I suppose, to the girl, or she'll tell a story to someone else, and we see that as well. So there's kind of various different stories all kind of mashed into one, and basically all of them presented as dreams or in some way not real. And for that reason, I found it very hard to get engaged in this at all, we know right from the beginning that what we're seeing is a dream, and therefore just all of the tension that I might have felt was drained out of it. I didn't really care about about the dream girl, or then even less about the people in the stories that were being told within that dream. I think also maybe just I don't really vibe with Angela Carter as an author either. I have tried to read The Bloody Chamber and other stories, and while I started off quite enjoying it, I quickly lost patience with it. And I kind of lost patience with this film as well. I did at least make it to the end of the film, but I didn't really enjoy much of it at all. It does have a good cast and it looks good, but just as a story, I couldn't get invested in it at all. Next up, we have a film where nothing much happens at all, and it could very well have been very boring, but it really wasn't. This is The Wind Will Carry Us. It was written and directed by Abbas Kiarostami and was released in 1999. It's a kind of documentary-style drama, and it follows a documentary filmmaker from Tehran who goes to this tiny village in the middle of nowhere to make a film. He plans to film the funeral rites of this old woman. However, his plans are somewhat delayed by the fact that the old woman hasn't died yet. In some ways, this film is quite static and quite repetitive. There are multiple scenes where the documentary filmmaker gets a call on his mobile and has to drive all the way to the top of a hill just to get signal to talk to the people who are calling him. And, you know, we have to watch him drive to the top of the hill every time. It doesn't just cut from him getting in the car to being at the top of the hill after a couple of times. We watch that drive every time. But, you know, I think it's a very meditative film, and what starts off seeming kind of mundane and repetitive and maybe a little frustrating gradually gains this kind of significance, and there's some really beautiful philosophical ideas in here about life and death and the meaning of life and death, and ultimately the idea of learning to appreciate the small things in life, because there might not be another life after this one where things are all better. This might be all there is, so we'd best enjoy it while we have it. I found that a really moving and touching idea, and it was presented in a really delicate but ultimately very powerful way. If you can't tell, I thought this film was absolutely brilliant. Next up, we have my first rewatch of the month, and that is The Silence of the Lambs. This is a horror thriller from 1991, directed by Jonathan Demme, written by Ted Talley, and based on the book by Thomas Harris. So this is a thriller, a dark horror, and it follows a trainee FBI agent called Clarice, played by Jodie Foster, as she is tasked with interviewing the infamous serial killer Hannibal Lecter, played by Anthony Hopkins. The reason that she is tasked with this is because they hope to gain some psychological insight into another serial killer who is on the loose, Buffalo Bill, as he is termed. And yeah, this is... well, I have very, very mixed feelings about this film, because, you know, artistically, and, you know, in terms of, like, movie making and like craft, it's impeccable. It is an incredible film. It's one of only 3 films to have won the big 5 Oscars: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Screenplay, Best Actor, and Best Actress. In case you're curious, the only other films to have done that were It Happened One Night and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So yeah, this is a really gripping, powerful piece of cinema. I was riveted from start to finish, as I was the first time I saw it. It's really fantastic. However, it does also rely heavily on some very problematic transphobic tropes that frankly aren't based in any form of reality. It's such a well-made and tense and gripping film, and it just has this one element that is pretty heinous. So yeah, I find it hard to kind of reconcile those two facts. I feel them both very strongly. I think it's an amazing film. I think it's a terrible film. That kind of, I hold both of those conflicting ideas in my mind at once, and it's kind of confusing and a little bit uncomfortable. So overall, I would say if that's a trope that is going to bother you, then I would recommend probably staying away from this film. However, if you won't be bothered by it, or if you're prepared for it, then everything else about the film is really fantastic and worth seeing. But yeah, overall, I can't quite recommend it. Next up, we have Us. This was written and directed by Jordan Peele, released in 2019, and it's a kind of psychological sci-fi-ish horror. It begins in the 80s with a young girl called Adelaide who is on holiday with her family, and she walks off on her own and goes into this hall of mirrors and encounters a doppelganger of herself. Years later, Adelaide is now married with children, and the family go on holiday back to the same place. And Adelaide is getting increasingly uncomfortable about the thought of going there and going to the beach where she found this hall of mirrors and met her like doppelganger self. And sure enough, the family is confronted by doppelgangers of all of them. I've been a fan of Jordan Peele since the Key and Peele days, the comedy sketch duo, and I saw his first film, Get Out, not long after it came out, and I really loved that. But for some reason, it's taken me this long to get around to seeing his second film, Us, and I'm really glad I saw it because this is fantastic. It's very tense and gripping, and I have to say the whole cast does an amazing job in basically everyone has dual roles. And yeah, they're all great. Now, what I was saying earlier about ambiguity in storytelling, I think that Us is an example of the kind of storytelling ambiguity that I really like, that I find really engaging, because this is a story that leaves me with a lot of questions. There's definitely some kind of social and political commentary that is being hinted at, but unlike Get Out, which is quite straightforward in its message, Us kind of doesn't spell it out too explicitly. It leaves you wondering and questioning in a way that I found really engaging and thought-provoking. It's a film that I kept thinking about. My thoughts kept returning to it long after I'd watched it. And, for that reason, it has stayed with me in a way that, while I enjoyed Get Out, I think Get Out hasn't stuck with me the same way. Get Out was brilliant, don't get me wrong, but I thought Us was just excellent. Just a really interesting, thought-provoking, and also, really scary film. So, this is a great example of the kind of horror I really love. Next up, we have another rewatch, and that's 12 Monkeys. This was directed by Terry Gilliam, released in 1995, and it was written by David and Janet Peoples, based on a short film from the 60s by Chris Barker called La Jetée, which, by the way, I've also seen. The whole thing is made up of still images. It's very weird. Anyway, this is set in a dystopian future where the majority of humanity has been wiped out by this virus, which was apparently deliberately released into the world. So the scientists in this future send back a man called Cole, played by Bruce Willis. They send him back in time to try and get information about the virus and hopefully a sample of the unmutated strain so that they can try and work out a cure. However, when Cole is sent back, he finds himself sent to an insane asylum because he keeps saying he's from the future, and obviously nobody believes him. I really enjoyed revisiting 12 Monkeys. It must have been at least a decade and a half since I last saw it, and I still vividly remembered quite a lot of it, especially the ending. So I suppose the ending didn't really have any surprises for me anymore, but yeah, I still enjoyed the journey to get there. Terry Gilliam's very distinctive visual style is very much on show here. It's probably not my favourite Terry Gilliam film. I'm probably a bigger fan of either Brazil or Time Bandits, depending on my mood. But yeah, this is great. And I have to say, Bruce Willis puts in a really good performance here. I think that he can sometimes kind of be a bit bored with the film and sort of just phone it in. But when he actually cares about the film, which he clearly does here, he can put in a really great performance. And yeah, it's a great kind of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey plot, all about kind of predestination and questions of sanity and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, really good film. The only reason it's not a highlight of the month is because I watched so many other great films. But yeah, this is a really good one. And finally, going all in on horror, we've got Hellraiser. This is a dark, supernatural horror film written and directed by Clive Barker in 1987 and adapted from Clive Barker's own novella, The Hellbound Heart. So this story kind of revolves around this mystical puzzle box, which isn't named in the original film, but I believe is later revealed to be called the Lament Configuration. And basically, when people solve this puzzle box, it summons the Cenobites, who are these kind of interdimensional beings for whom pain and pleasure are indistinguishable. So, they will kill you, but you'll enjoy it when it's happening. So in a sort of prologue, we see a man called Frank, who is a hedonist and a pleasure seeker who has sought out this puzzle box and solves it and summons the Cenobites, who then do what the Cenobites do and basically tear him to pieces. However, a little later, when Frank's brother moves back into the old family home, an accidental drop of blood spilled on the floorboards brings Frank back to life, sort of. He no longer has any skin, and he needs more blood to kind of put the rest of his body back together and try to evade the Cenobites. From there, things get bloody and horrible and really fun. Yeah, this is a kind of pretty nasty and gruesome, fairly kinky and sacrilegious film. And I mean that all in a very good way. I had a great time with this. It's a very very horrible and intense sort of horror film, and yeah, that's just what I was looking for. So yeah, if you want blood spatters and S&M demons, then this is the film for you. It certainly was the film for me, I'm rather disturbed to admit. The bit at the end. So those are all the films I watched in July. I also watched a few episodes of Star Trek, the original series, and some Twin Peaks, and Game Changer, and a bit of Columbo. But I won't bother with the details of those. Anyway, I'd love to hear in the comments if you've seen any of these films and what you thought of them, or if there are any other films, especially horror films, that you might recommend to me based on what I've just been talking about, or whatever else is on your mind. I'm always happy to hear from you. Anyway, that's about it from me today. I hope you're having a lovely day, and I will see you when I see you.